In this video, I'm going to show you a real easy way to remember how to convert between percent, decimal, and fraction. And what I call this is go the decimal route. In other words, whenever you want to convert a percent to a fraction, first convert to a decimal. If you want to convert a fraction to a percent, first convert to a decimal. Here's the example I have here, 2.3%. We're wondering, well, what fraction is that? Well, we turn it into a decimal by using the rule of two places, which is move the decimal point two places. And the percent is always the bigger number. Now, in order for 2.3 to be a bigger number, we have to move the decimal point left two places and turn that into 0.023. Now we can turn that number into a fraction, just remembering that the number of decimal places, 3 in this case, is the power of 10 in the denominator. So 0.023 becomes 23 over 1,000, since 1,000 is 10 to the third. Just remember, the denominator will have the same number of zeros as there were places in the decimal. We had 1, 2, 3 places in the decimal, 1, 2, 3 zeros in our fraction denominator. Let's look at a few examples. Let's start with the example, convert 0.023% into a fraction. Using our method here, we're going to first turn 0.023% into a decimal. The rule of two places says to move the decimal point two places. Well, we have to move the decimal point to the left because the percent is always a bigger number. So we end up putting 2 zeros in and moving that decimal point, and we get a decimal of 0.00023. Now we turn that into a fraction. We count the number of places. There's 5 places to the right of the decimal point. That means our denominator in our fraction is 10 to the 5th, or it's 1 with 5 zeros. So our fraction is 23 over 100,000. Now let's look at the example where we convert the mixed number 4.5 into a percent. Our first step here is to turn the 4.5 into a decimal. Well, 4.5 is 4 5/10, which is equal to 4.5. Or you could take 1 and divide out by 2, and you get 0.5 as the decimal part. So 4.5 is 4.5. Now we can take that decimal and turn it into a percent. And this time we move the decimal point two places to the right, because remember, the decimal is always smaller, the percent is always bigger, so we end up with 450%. Our last example here is convert 3/7 to a percent and then round to the nearest tenth of a percent. Following this same strategy, we take 3/7 and turn it into a decimal. Well, you have to take 3 and divide it out by 7. Either by hand or with a calculator. And if you do that, you get this decimal that goes on and on and on. It seems to go on forever with no pattern, but it actually does have a really long pattern. It's 0.42857, and then I believe the decimals repeat after that. But we don't need all of those places. If we take just the 0.42857 and turn it into a percent, we move that decimal point two places to the left to get the bigger number that's always the percent, and it's 42.857%. And then there's other decimal places after that, but we don't need all of those. If we're going to round to the tenth of the percent, we just have to know what comes after that 8. So we have 42.85. The 85 says round that 8 up to a 9. So our percent rounded to the tenth of a percent is 42.9%. I'm going to finish this video off with some percent and fraction equivalents to memorize. The first is a half. A half is a half of something, or 50%, because a half is 0.50 and 0.50 is 50%. Now half of a half is a fourth, and that would mean a fourth is 25%. Also, you could take 1/4 and turn it into a decimal of 0.25. Now if you add these two results together, a half plus a fourth, you get 3/4. And of course, that's equal to adding the 25% and the 50%. So 3/4 is 75%. You can calculate these out, but it's just handier to remember them. Now here's a couple repeating decimal equivalents. 1/3. 1/3 is the decimal 0.33333, 3 repeating. Well, if we turn that into a percent, we get 33.3 repeating percent. Now we could also write that as 33 1/3 percent. But in real life, we usually round off percents. We don't write percents as mixed numbers or repeating numbers. We would round this off. If it's the 1/10 of a percent that we need, we'd round it to 33.3%. If we want more decimal places, maybe we'd round it to 33.333%. However much precision we need. Likewise, 2/3 is 66.6 repeating percent, which is also equal to 66 2/3 of a percent. But in applications, we would round this to 66.7% if we round to the 1/10 of a percent. Again, we use rounded percents rather than mixed numbers in real world applications.